He worked his whole life at a lumber mill in Oregon until the sound stopped. He woke up early, not because he had to check the clock, not because someone called his name. He woke because his body had learned long ago that mornings belonged to work. The air in the house was cool. Oregon mornings often were. Even in the warmer months, the air carried a softness and a chill that came from trees, mountains, and early mist resting above them. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment, letting the quiet become familiar before the day began. This wasn't a rushed life. This wasn't a life of alarms and racing through hallways or freeways. This was a life built on rhythm, on steady repetition, on work that felt both heavy and meaningful at the same time. He lived in a logging town, not the kind of place that appeared in travel blogs, not the kind of town that tourists traveled across the world to see. It was quieter than that, more ordinary than that, more real than that. A town that existed because of trees, a town shaped by sawdust, timber, and the constant sound of lumber being cut and prepared. He had grown up here, and for as long as he could remember, the sound of the mill had always been part of life. It wasn't just background noise. It was the heartbeat of the place. It hummed, it roared, it echoed, and somehow it always reassured. Because as long as you could hear it, work existed, life continued, the town breathed. He made coffee like he always did. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated, just something warm to carry him from the quiet of the morning into the weight of the day. He looked out the window for a moment. Tall trees in the distance, the kind of trees that seemed ancient, steady, unmovable. You could live your whole life under them and still feel small in a way that didn't hurt. Small in a way that grounded you, reminded you that you were part of something older, bigger, wider than yourself. He didn't think this poetically, of course. He just felt it, the way people sometimes understand truth without needing to say it out loud. He got dressed, not in anything special, just clothes that made sense. Clothes meant to work in. Clothes that could carry sawdust, sweat, weather, and time. He tied his boots with practiced hands. Boots that had molded to his feet over years of mornings exactly like this. Then he stepped outside into the kind of air that wakes you fully. And he drove toward the lumber mill. If you grew up here, you didn't need directions to the mill. You didn't even need to think about how to get there. Your body already knew. The roads curved gently. The trees stood high on either side. Fog sometimes lingered low across open space like a careful blanket waiting to lift when the day warmed. Some mornings the air smelled like damp forest. Other mornings like freshly cut wood drifting through everything. Both scents felt like home. By the time he reached the edge of town, he could already hear it. The sound, not one noise, but many overlapping. The whine of saws, the thud of logs being moved, the grind of machinery, the echo of men shouting instructions over the volume. It might have sounded harsh to someone visiting for the first time. To him, it sounded like stability. He had worked at the lumber mill most of his life. It didn't feel like a career choice. It didn't feel like a dramatic decision. It felt like what life naturally became when you were born here. His father had worked with wood. His uncles had worked at the mill. Men he grew up respecting had carried their lives through it. You didn't chase faraway dreams here. You built steady ones. The first time he stepped into the mill as a worker, not as a child visiting his father, the sound hit him differently. It didn't just come from outside anymore. It surrounded him. It vibrated under his feet. It lived in the walls, in the air, in his chest. Huge logs rolled onto machinery. Blades cut through them with screaming precision. Workers moved with focus, strength, and a kind of unspoken coordination developed over years of practice. There wasn't room for distraction. There wasn't time for hesitation. You paid attention. You respected the work. You respected the danger inside it. Because here, mistakes didn't embarrass you. They hurt you. They left marks. They sometimes took people away. He learned fast, not because someone demanded perfection, but because everyone understood how important it was to get things right. He wasn't loud. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't the kind of man who talked simply to fill silence. He worked. He listened. He improved. And slowly, the mill became part of him the same way it had been part of those before him. It gave him something he never tried to describe, a sense of belonging stronger than pride, calmer than excitement, more steady than ambition. He didn't need to feel great. He just needed to feel needed. And he did. Every day, life built itself around that. The town's rhythm matched the mill. Children grew up measuring days by whether their parents were working long shifts or shorter ones. Holidays were shaped around production schedules. Community gatherings weren't made elegant for show. They were simple, made out of familiarity, and the kind of closeness that only comes from people living the same kind of life side by side. He wasn't rich, but he wasn't forgotten by the world either. He stood in the middle of something that made sense. Something practical, something physical, something you could touch. Work that became real things. Boards, beams, materials that would go on to build houses, stores, schools, towns. He never saw where they ended up, but he knew they meant something. Years passed, slowly, quickly, both at once. That's how time behaves when routine becomes familiar. Seasons changed, but the work remained. Winter mornings colder, summer afternoons heavier. He grew older, not suddenly, just gradually, like a tree gaining rings year after year, never noticing it in the moment, only realizing the passage of time long after. His hands became rougher. His shoulders carried more weight than they once had. The strength didn't fade immediately. It simply shifted from youthful force to lived-in durability. He stopped thinking of himself as young. Then he stopped questioning whether he had ever been. This was his life, and he was okay with that. More than okay. He was grateful, because the world outside sometimes felt uncertain. But as long as the saws kept running, as long as the ground kept trembling slightly under machinery, as long as the town could still hear the familiar grind, life remained steady. He didn't ask for more. He didn't think in terms of dreams abandoned or opportunities missed. He thought in terms of work done, days completed, things built. He thought in terms of enough. And then, like so many things in life that feel permanent, certainty began to loosen, not with an explosion, not with a dramatic break. It happened the same way a rope frays, one thread at a time. Rumors. That's usually how it starts. Quiet voices, half-finished sentences, careful conversations in corners. A news article someone mentioned, then another, then someone saying, I heard, changes in the industry, new markets, costs shifting, companies choosing cheaper routes. People always assumed elsewhere meant somewhere far away, somewhere that wouldn't reach them. But sometimes elsewhere slowly moves closer. At first, nobody took it too seriously. The mill had been here forever. That's how people talked. Always. Forever. Since before I was born. Words that sound confident, but often mean, I can't imagine life without it. Imagining something impossible doesn't make it impossible. Then came changes. Smaller at first. Schedules adjusted, shipments delayed, maintenance postponed longer than usual. Management meetings became more frequent, but explanations didn't. Nobody came out and said, this is ending. They said, Temporary, restructuring, strategic adjustments, words built to soften the truth. Without revealing it, people continued working, because work is how you survive uncertainty. You keep showing up. You keep doing what you've always done. You hope consistency protects you. He did the same. He still woke early. He still drove through mist. He still listened to the sound and told himself it was still strong, even when it no longer felt unbreakable. One day, something changed in a way you could feel rather than see. The sound didn't carry the same weight. The rhythm felt thinner. Pauses where there never used to be pauses. Quiete moments. In a place that was never meant to be quiet. Someone mentioned layoffs. Someone mentioned closure in other towns. Someone mentioned a phrase no one wanted to say out loud. Maybe it won't come back. He didn't panic, but something inside him shifted, like a tree bending slightly in the wind, pretending it isn't worried about the storm, but unable to ignore it completely. The day the announcement finally came, there was no dramatic movie moment, no music, no shouting crowd, no emotional speech prepared to comfort anyone. There was just a group of tired men and women standing in an ordinary place, on an ordinary morning, while someone in a clean suit read words from paper, words that had probably been read in other towns before, words that would be read in other towns after. Restructuring, economic pressure, unprofitable, transition period, support programs, thank you for your service, professional words, cold words, words that try to sound respectful, while quietly removing the ground beneath people's lives. Nobody cried right away. They stood there first, trying to understand something that didn't want to be understood. Some stared at the ground. Some stared at the building. Some stared at nothing, as if searching the air for a different answer. He didn't move. He just listened and felt something inside him loosen, like a knot untying slowly, leaving emptiness in its place. People began talking quietly afterward, not loudly, not angrily, just quietly, because when something big breaks, shock often arrives before grief. Hands rested on shoulders. Head shook. Someone tried to make a joke that didn't land. Someone laughed anyway, because laughter sometimes protects you. For a few seconds longer, he drove home after the announcement. Same road, same trees, same curves, but everything felt different. Not outside, inside. The world hadn't changed shape, but his place inside it had. He rolled down the window. No sound of the mill in the distance. Just wind, just birds, just ordinary natural silence. And it felt wrong, because silence wasn't peaceful here. Silence meant something had stopped. Silence meant something had been taken. Silence meant life was now divided into when a mill ran, and after it didn't. The first days after closure didn't feel real. People still woke early out of habit. Men still tied boots. Hands still reached for work clothes. Then paused, realizing there was nowhere to go. You don't turn off decades of routine in a week, or a month, or a year. Routine sits in the body, and when life removes it, something inside doesn't know where to stand anymore. He walked through his house slowly those mornings, not because he wanted to, because there wasn't anything else to do. He felt lost without movement. Он чувствовал себя потерянным без движения. Coffee didn't taste the same. Food didn't matter much. Time didn't move normally. Hours stretched out wider than they used to. Minutes felt louder. He found himself standing at windows, looking toward nothing, like he was waiting for something that could never return. The town changed too. At first, it was subtle. A quieter street here, a closed storefront there, fewer trucks, less dust in the air, more silence than anyone wanted. Then bigger things followed. Families moved away. Houses went up for sale. Not because people wanted new lives, but because they couldn't afford to stay in the old one. Stores closed. Schools shrank. Church pews emptied. Community events grew smaller. Not because people didn't care, but because they didn't know what to celebrate anymore. A place can remain physically while disappearing emotionally. That's what happened here. He tried to find other work. Of course he did. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't entitled. He wasn't waiting for someone to fix his life for him. He had always worked. Work wasn't something he did. It was something he was. But he was older now. Factories didn't want men whose hands carried history. And joints carried time. They wanted younger bodies. Cheaper bodies. Faster bodies. He went to interviews. He nodded politely when someone younger than his own working years explained why he wasn't the right fit. He heard phrases like, overqualified, not aligned with our direction, limited openings, we'll be in touch. They rarely were. So he went home. He sat with days that no longer knew how to fill themselves. Time became something heavy to carry. Время стало чем-то тяжелым, что нужно носить. He fixed small things around the house. He walked. He fished occasionally. He helped neighbors when he could. He tried not to let his thoughts sit too long in one place. Because when they did, they always ended up back inside the mill. In the sound, the rhythm, the weight, the belonging. He missed belonging. Not to a job, to a purpose. Years passed. Not dramatically, just gradually. The same quiet way life had once built itself. Life now faded. He grew older, hair thinner, movement slower, strength quieter. He didn't talk about the mill much anymore. Not because he forgot it, but because talking about something that no longer exists sometimes makes its absence feel louder. Instead, he carried it silently, in memory, in routine that no longer had a use, in stories that lived mostly in his head. People sometimes asked him, years later, do you miss it? He always answered the same way. He would pause, look slightly downward, think for a moment, not because he didn't know the answer, but because the answer was larger than the question. And he'd say softly, I miss what life felt like when it was there. Not only the work, not only the sound, not only the building. He missed a world where things felt stable, predictable, solid, where a man could give his life to something and trust that it would still be there. When he needed it, he didn't feel angry, just quieter, like a fire that didn't burn out loudly. It simply ran out of wood. He still drove past the place sometimes. Not every day, not in ritual, just now and then, when life placed him on that road again. The building stood there for a while, empty, silent, like a giant breathing out for the last time. Then pieces began disappearing, equipment removed, sections taken down, nature slowly creeping back in, as it always does. Grass where machines once stood, wind where engines once roared, silence where life once gathered. Standing there one last time, he realized something important. The mill hadn't just been a workplace. It had been an anchor. And anchors don't just hold ships. They hold people. When they lift, you drift. Not always dramatically, not always destructively. Sometimes, you simply drift into a quieter place, where life feels less certain, less defined, less connected. He didn't cry. He didn't break. He just stood there and let the moment exist. A memory saying goodbye to a place that had already been gone for a long time. He went home. He made coffee. He sat in his chair. He looked out at the trees. Older than him, older than the mill, older than the town, still standing. Maybe, he thought, that's the lesson. Things change. Nothing promised stays forever. Even the strongest structures eventually fall silent. But life, quiet, ordinary, uncelebrated life, still matters. What he did mattered. What the mill gave mattered. What the town lived through mattered. Even if the world forgot, he didn't. And that meant something. A quiet ending. A real one. Human. True. Before we forgot, no one would rebuild. Times Beach wasn't just abandoned. It was condemned by truth and erased by necessity. The town that no longer exists. Most ghost towns slowly fade away. People move. Economies collapse. Time does the rest. But Times Beach is different. This wasn't a slow disappearance. This wasn't nature reclaiming what humans abandoned. This was deliberate. By the late 1980s, the town was gone. Not decayed, not half alive, but physically erased. Houses were demolished. Streets were leveled. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to empty space. Where a community once stood, there is now almost nothing left to find. The government transformed the land into what is now Route 66 State Park, a beautiful stretch of nature sitting quietly over the memory of disaster. People walk, cycle, and take photos there without ever realizing that an entire American town once existed beneath their feet. Times Beach became one of the most powerful lessons in U.S. environmental history. A reminder that decisions have consequences, that shortcuts can destroy lives, that something as small as the wrong solution can poison an entire world for the people who live in it. Route 66 State Park, beauty built on disaster. Today, the land is green. It looks peaceful. Visitors smile, take photos, ride bicycles, and enjoy the scenery. Most of them never know. They don't realize that beneath the trees, beneath the soil, beneath the carefully restored land, there once was a town full of life, love, and ordinary people who simply trusted the wrong promise. Times Beach lives now only in memory and in the lessons it left behind. Today, Times Beach is not a town. It is a scar, a story, a warning, a city that had to be erased so that future generations would never repeat the same mistake. This is the legacy of Times Beach, Missouri, the American town that no longer exists.